Excited to be here. Have Michael Klein with me. Michael, where are you calling in from, and maybe a little intro to yourself for those that are.
Sure, thanks, Rich. I'm calling in from the Poconos, Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful fall day here, so yeah, that's where I'm out. A lot of people always ask me, do I live in the Poconos? So yeah, we're here. That's all we do is eat and breathe and sleep. Short-term rentals from the Poconos. So that's where I'm at.
Yep, yep, good. And yeah, I'm Rich Clover, based in Bradenton, Florida. Kind of referred to it as the Florida Sun Coast, is the area that I cover. I live there as well. Today, I happen to be up in Virginia visiting my son at school, but enjoying the same fall weather that Michael's talking about. So today, we're going to be talking about how to buy a house in a seller's market. I think in the Poconos as well as in Bradenton or the Florida Suncoast area, I know I'm personally seeing it being a seller's market. I think if you get on some of the headlines and look at news, someone would say that Florida is a buyer's market. So maybe we'll get to talk through some of those topics and dispel some of those falsities, if you will. But really want to talk about, especially as we're getting into the end of the year, we still have a lot of buyers looking at buying for cost segregation purposes and wanting to get those purchased and live by the end of the year. So there's a lot of buyers looking right now in popular markets like the Poconos and like the Florida Suncoast of Bradenton, Seminole, Largo, Sarasota, etc. So Michael, let's get it started off. Like, why are sellers markets especially challenging for STR investors right now?
Yeah, well, I'll just add to what you said, because I think, again, the headlines I think are a little bit confusing because you can't extrapolate nationally to local real estate markets. And even within a local real estate market, you can't extrapolate, a home that's, not in a great location, not turnkey or super updated. Versus one that is, right? So even within local markets, I think what you find is that the best real estate, the best locations that are, very desirable are always going to be desirable. And so that's one of the things that I always try to tell people, because, we don't, and I think this is true. I mean, at 𝗁𝗵𝗄, right? We're not looking at the bad inventory. We're only ever looking at the very top 1% of the best deals in the market. And so, and especially now, as you said, with, everybody looking before the end of the year, I think that, this is probably applicable to a lot of markets right now. So I think you have to, I think you have to be cognizant of that. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful. And obviously, our job here is that if you want to be successful and buy a great property, we want to help you accomplish that. So it's really important that you go into it, with realistic expectations and you have the right advice, because you never know how many, you don't know how many good deals are going to come up between now and the next, 6 or 8 weeks. And so if you miss out on those, then because you're not prepared, or you're not putting in the right offer, you're not structuring it the right way, well, then you might just miss out on it for this year completely. And so yeah, we don't, that's what, so it is a challenge. And I think, and that's what we're here, to help you do. But what are you seeing in your market right now in terms of being able to do deals?
Yeah, same thing. I think I do get on some calls with clients that are maybe that first conversation, and they're like, yeah, I understand Florida's a buyer's market, so help me find that great deal, want to offer $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 under asking. And I'm like, well, in reality, that's not the case necessarily. There's certainly going to be homes that are overpriced, and we'll look at those and address those accordingly. But yeah, I think there's a lot of STR investors looking in markets like Bradenton and Poconos. Like, both of our markets have shown up on lists the last few years about like the top places to invest. So it's attracted just maybe people's eyes that wouldn't otherwise know about these areas. I certainly hadn't heard of the Poconos until, a couple of years ago when it started showing up on some of those lists. But obviously it's a great destination. And yeah, even just like a personal story, like it was about a month and a half ago, new home went on the market, 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom. And as soon as it was listed, I'm like, okay, that's underpriced. I went to it immediately, talked to the listing agent, got in there, did my video walkthrough, put it to my clients, started getting an offer wrote up and submitted. And before I submit, obviously I always check in with the agent, and she's like, Rich, we have 7 offers the first day. What is going on? Like, why are so many people offering on this? She goes, I compared this to the house in the neighborhood next door. And I told her, like, well, you missed it a little bit, because the house next door is in an HOA that doesn't allow short-term rentals, and this one does. And yeah, you're a little under market value, but she ended up getting it up to market value because there was so many people interested, and then it was going for 50,000 over asking. That's not common. That only happened because they did hit the market way underpriced and ended up, trading at the right number. But just as an example of, like, we'll touch on it, but yeah, you got to be ready to move quick. And there's some key strategies in competitive markets that we'll discuss today to give you and your clients kind of the leg up when we have to engage in those types of deals.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's worth mentioning too is there's things that are very, very attractive, and then there's also things that maybe do have wiggle room or that are less attractive.
Yeah.
And normally that has to do with, like, how pricing that you just mentioned, right? If it's underpriced, which is a very good listing strategy, right, to get multiple offers and then get it up. But also, like, is the property really, really turnkey, right? Because once you start needing renovations and stuff like that, your buyer universe shrinks a little bit. So then maybe we do have a little bit more time, or have, we can do what everybody's looking for, right? Maybe we can get some seller credits or something like that. And then certainly, like, if a home has revenue, right, then that also kind of de-risk it for a lot of investors. So then there's going to be, more desirability that way. So I think it is helpful to, and this is why you work with an agent, that they're going to, it's kind of like, no, you can't get away with that. And yeah, okay, we can actually try that. But what I'm finding right now is most people, they want turnkey, they want revenue, right? Because they want to put it in service really, really quickly. And so you have to kind of be, you have to be cognizant, if that's what if you're looking at what everybody else is looking at, then you're in a seller's market, you're in a competitive market, and you really don't, you can't mess around. And so, one of the things I like to say, it's a little bit of a mindset shift, which is like, I know and people have a hard time with this because they're like, I'm buying a property, I got to negotiate. And actually the mindset isn't, that you're trying to, see what you can get away with. It's really like, because you kind of mess around and find out that way. It's really is like, what's the minimum thing we need to do to, like, just wrap this up and win this deal and get it under contract? Then that's when the leverage kind of shifts over to you. And it sounds similar, but it's a little bit different, where it's like, it's a good deal coming in quickly at full ask is not a bad strategy, because if you negotiate, then you just draw out the time, and then you're just waiting for something, somebody else to come into the mix.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you kind of started touching on some of those strategies. So, for investors that are looking right now, or even in the future when they're looking into homes that are in competitive markets like we have, what's one of the first steps that they should take when they're looking to purchase a home in a competitive market? How can they be prepared to execute and when they're working with you?
Yeah, I think the first one is it's really about just getting prepared, which means, because you want to be in a position where you can be decisive and you can move quickly. And in order to do that, like, you need to be prepared. And so, if we see a good deal, you definitely don't want to be like, let's get like on the weekend, right? You don't want to be like, oh, my lender can't do a pre-approval. Like, that's like, you definitely don't want to be in that situation. So getting the financing in order. I understand that sometimes it changes, but at least having a pre-approval ready and kind of having knowing what you can pull off and what you can't, and how that's kind of going to affect, your return, so that when we're looking at it and evaluating it, you can be decisive. And And then I think it's also, you know, about having an understanding for a market or a couple markets, because you have to have some familiarity, you know, that you've at least seen a couple pitches. That's my best analogy, is, you know, seeing a couple pitches in terms of deals, so that when you see something that looks good, you're like, yeah, this looks good. Let's move. So yeah, I think preparation is a key. But what do you, I mean, did I miss anything, or what do you kind of?
No, I agree. I think it's you should already have that market understood, right? Of what you're looking for, what different property types do well, what you're willing to invest, knowing what your capital outlay is for down payment and upgrades. That way, again, when we find something that you've kind of checked all those boxes, and now you're ready to execute. And thing that I see holding us up sometimes is that pre-approval letter. It's easy to get. Let's go ahead and get that. That way, you know, when we're ready to make that offer, we're not sitting on our hands waiting to do that.
Okay. So in terms of, I mean, we're kind of, we got to kind of maybe going back a step, but I was just, I'm curious if you're seeing, like, you know, what trends are you kind of seeing in the market, in terms of, you know, what other types of offers are coming in, or kind of what are you seeing that's sort of like recurring themes whenever you're going into one of these, you know, bidding on a good deal?
Yeah. Really, it is all about the competitive nature of the number of people looking to invest in my market. So, you know, there's other teams out there similar to 𝗪𝗵 that maybe aren't as good as 𝗪𝗵, but, you know, there's other agents out there that specialize in short-term rentals, and they have their clients as well, and they're looking in these popular markets. And so I think the trend that I'm seeing is, you know, it is competitive. We're all looking at that same buy box of, like, having the home, has the pool here in Florida, that has a little bit of space for outdoor amenities. But the challenge, I think, that maybe is unique to my market, and it may be the same as yours. You're the 𝗶𝗁 expert, but, like, my market, it's a primary residence market, right? It's not a second home market. It's not necessarily a vacation home market. It's a primary residence market. And so, you know, it is all about finding that home that fits those criteria to make it into a good short-term rental. And so right now, one of the benefits investors have had with the interest rate situation, the higher interest rates and the price points that homes are at, we haven't really competed with home buyers that are looking for that primary residence. I think those buyers have slowed down a little bit, but they're going to be coming back into the market as rates drop, and it's just going to get more competitive. But it's kind of the trend that I'm seeing, is that it has been a good time for investors because less competition from, you know, primary home buyers.
Got it. Okay.
But
Yeah,
that won't last.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, you're mostly competing with other investors. I mean, I guess that's the one thing I've seen a little bit, and I think it's helpful sometimes when you're on the listing side and you can kind of see the offers come in and you see it from both directions. And it is interesting, like, how similar everybody's thinking, you know, like, because you can almost like guess who the coaching program or the accelerator program is based on the offer, like, because certain of them have different kind of, you know, they have different strategies, or they have different kind of ways of operating, which is interesting because, you know, you can potentially use that to stand out, you know. And I think people don't want to hear this, but, like, if you're a seller and you're going to come in and, like, oh yeah, let's offer them full ask. And then, you know, like I was just saying, let's offer full ask, let's get it in contract. It's a great deal. And then, you know, people are like, well, let's, you know, well, what, can we get some seller credits and stuff like that? And then can we throw an appraisal contingency in and all of that? And so once you start to do that, that looks less desirable for the seller, because you're almost signaling to them, hey, I'm an investor, and terms are important. Don't get me wrong. But but really great deals are also, you know, like if you want to win that deal, sometimes you can't have your cake and eat it too. And so if you can kind of, you know, not do that, right? Not signal that like the only way this deal works for me is that if it appraises exactly at the price, and, you know, with an appraisal contingency, oh, and by the way, I also want like, you know, $20,000 of seller credits, that, you know, that's going to put you. So what you want to do is you just want to say like, hey, I want this property. I'm a qualified buyer. I want the property. And I'm going to make you a fair deal. And then you, by the way, not to say that you don't get other opportunities to negotiate after you get into contract and things like that. But I think just by coming in and signaling that you're a strong qualified buyer can actually separate you from the pack when everybody else kind of looks like, you know, they might look more fickle or might look like they're really shopping for terms, if you will.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's right. Kind of having your strategy in mind and being flexible with your strategy too, right? Knowing that, you know, if your strategy is only finding something where you can get $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in seller credits, to your point earlier, now we're looking at a very different aspect of homes that, you know, may not be readily available. Maybe we got to wait or whatever the case might be. But being flexible in that strategy, depending upon the home, right? If a new home comes to the market that checks the boxes, hey, this is going to be a great short-term rental, but look at it, it needs completely renovated on the inside. It's got old carpet, but it's got the square footage. It's got the bedroom count, got the bathroom count. It just needs to be refreshed. Okay, now we have a little bit of room to play with. Right now, this isn't going to be as attractive because, as you talked about, it's going to need a little bit of work. So the number of buyers that fits is going to get smaller. So if that works for you, great. But as your point earlier, if it's something a little closer to turnkey, we're not going to have the flexibility to, you know, to be offering those credits. So, are you seeing any specific property types or locations in your market that give buyers a better chance of winning deals?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what you said there. I think the thing I always try to do is I always try to right size the deal. And again, it's like I think of deals in different category types, and you just have to be aware of which one you're doing. So if there's a problem with the deal, I always try to dig into, you know, well, how do we solve that problem? And we solve it for both sides. So I think, you know, the big ones there are, I mean, gosh, in the Poconos, it's probably, you know, it's all those things that we said, which are, you know, maybe the revenue's low, but we see the values there. We can identify what they're doing incorrectly and how, you know, either it's lack of amenities or something like that. Or, you know, or if it's value add, right? And it actually does need a lot of work. Like, let's try to craft something with seller credit so that it starts to kind of make sense for the buyer. Because we know right now it doesn't make sense. You know, it's not ready to go as is. So that gives us a little time to kind of structure the deal. So I think it's always kind of looking at each individual property and really trying to, you know, like solve the problem and also make sure that it makes sense on both sides for both parties. But yeah, what do you think? How do you kind of approach it so that, you know, like you increase the probability of success there?
Yeah, I'd say like having something that does require more value add is fit, but like I think one of the key strategies is being quick and really moving with. And so one of the things that I'm doing it's competitive, that if we wait a couple days, you know, they're going to have more and more eyes seeing the home. So, you know, when I'm starting my morning routine in my coffee, like I'm always checking for those new properties or properties with price drops that maybe they see a significant price drop. But more often it's a new home. As soon as I see something, like, because we look at hundreds of homes a day and we help investors, we know really quickly if it's going to be a good one or not, right? And so as soon as I see that, the first thing I do is schedule for as soon as I can get out there, get on the phone with the realtor, introduce myself if I don't already know them, let them know that, you know, very interested, But again, I don't have the client behind me yet necessarily that I've already presented this to. I'm kind of working in advance on their behalf, whether that's 1, 2, 3, or 4 clients, right? And that way, but to the listing side, they're like, hey, this person, this client, whoever is buying this home is really interested. They're moving quickly. And then I get that video, put it out to my VIP list. And, you know, when those clients are ready to move, we've kind of accelerated that process. We've given them a head start because we've already introduced ourselves to the listing agent. They know us. If we do end up getting in a situation where it's going to be a competitive offer, typically we're the first one in, and then they let us know like, hey, we have some other people that are interested. And then we just kind of have that conversation. You know, sometimes I always ask like, hey, you know, what's it going to take for you to take this off the market today? You know, if we want to submit an offer, we look like it. What does it take to get this off the market? And I had one recently said, full price offer, and it's yours. I'm like, okay. And numbers made sense. That's what we did. Others are like, you know what? Like they want to wait through the weekend to see, you know, we have some other showings. And then because we positioned ourselves, now I can be the one that comes back and says, okay, hey, we have our offer in. Just give me the benefit of like, let me know if we need to improve it, you know, let me know other offers that come in. And so we've kind of started to build that rapport, and they're never going to tell you where you need to be, but they'll give you that nudge and say, hey, you know, we have 3 other offers in that are better than yours. And then we can really work on a good offer strategy to ensure that the client wins the deal.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's, I mean, I do the exact same thing. And I think you gotta, that's what you need to do to win. Because as soon as that listing pops up and you're like, I'm sure you're like me, you look like, I mean, you see it like, it doesn't matter when it pops up any given day, you're going to see it immediately. So then it's like, the clock starts right at that point. And the way I kind of see it is that every second you kind of wait, right? Like you're just, you're risking, you know, somebody else coming in. And I think speed, getting started on that due diligence, getting the video, seeing the property, putting the pro forma together, making sure it all works, you know, that puts you kind of ahead of everybody else in that process. And then you can use speed as an advantage for yourself, right? Because, you know, once you know, if you can get in, what the ideal scenario is that that you're not competing against anybody. And so one way to ensure you're not competing against anybody is to get in before anybody else. Now that may not last, right? Or they might want to delay, but any way you slice it, you know, you're going to be better off if you move quickly, because maybe they do just accept it. Or if they say they want to wait and you have submitted a good offer, now they're kind of on the defensive a little bit, right? And so they're like, every day they're sitting around hoping that they're going to at least get something better. And then you can also be aggressive too, like you said. I mean, that's I've done this multiple times. It doesn't always work, but just call them up and say, hey, you know, you've already submitted a full price offer. We want the home. What do we got? I mean, like, what do we got to do? We've just given you everything you've asked for, right? Like, what else? What else do you want? Tell me, and then maybe we can do it. And if it's an extra like $10,000, like maybe that's worth it. You know, and even in the case where like none of this works, right? Like it's just going to be super competitive. Like even just having that extra time, I think, to sit there with the deal and evaluate and kind of see how the information comes in, still puts you in an advantage. So I think
I've even approached it sometimes where we do put that offer in on day one, but let them know like, hey, this is only valid until the end of today. If you want to wait to see if you do get another offer tomorrow or Saturday, our price then isn't going to be the same. If they call us, if we offer on Friday and they call us on Sunday, like, yeah, we don't have any other offers. Well, we're not offering the same full price asking now, right? Because now it's 2 days old. So even on their side, that's a risk that they need that they're going to have to take on their side. And so, you know, kind of to lower that hesitancy maybe from a buyer to offer full price right away. If it's competitive, it's going to be a good offer. If they don't end up getting someone else the following day, you know, we don't have to come back at that same number because they didn't accept it, right? We can come back at a lower number because we know they didn't get another offer.
Awesome. All right. So what, I mean, when you're actually, so what do you think, what can people do? How do you craft an offer that actually is going to stand out versus in a multiple offer situation? Like what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, we know when it's going to be a competitive situation. And I'll say, like, I'd say probably the last 7 or 8 deals I've done since the beginning of summer have all been competitive. Only one has gone over asking. That's the one I mentioned where they were just underpriced, right? So competitive doesn't necessarily mean you're going to overpay. It just means you have to be, mindful that there's other buyers out there. So what I have seen, and even following up with the sellers after we get under contract, I always ask, what our offers stand out from others. Sometimes it's like, yep, you wrote in a accelerator and it puts you above anybody else, and so you want it based on price. More often than not, it's like your offer was super clean, straightforward, easy for my seller to understand. You weren't asking for anything. We did have a financing contingency as an example, but it was 30-day close, 2 to 3% escrow payment, showing we're serious buyers, 10-day inspection period where we're not trying to draw it out, and not asking for any credits, just super clean, super easy to understand. Or sometimes they're like, yeah, they wanted a really long close and they wanted some credits for this and some credits for that. And that just introduces uncertainty and risk for the seller, right? Because most of the agents in my market that are selling homes primarily are selling primary residences, so they're not necessarily used to investors coming in and offering different credit strategies, etc. So they don't know how to explain that to their sellers, so they just forward that offer to their sellers, and someone that maybe hasn't sold a home in 20 years now has to see this contract and understand it, right? So the cleanest we can make it, the most simple we can make it, in those situations gives us the best chance of getting that under contract, because they know that it's going to close, they can understand it, and they know that in 30 days they're going to get their money. What do you see? Anything different for you?
No, I think yeah, I agree with all that. Yeah, I think a couple things that, I think I always think about it. I'm always doing role playing, right, between the seller and so I think the big renegotiation, one is just coming and like how it's communicated. Is it clean? The other two big negotiation points are around the inspection and the appraisal.
Yeah.
So I think if around the inspections, one of the things like we'll do is we'll say, hey, we're not going to nickel and dime you. So if something's going to cost less than $500, you don't have to worry about it. We normally, most of the time, we're keeping the inspection, right, contingency, but even that small thing in the scheme of things, like $500, unless there's a huge list of things that really, but then at that point, it's probably
Right.
it's not going to be as competitive. That gives a lot of assurance to the seller that, like, okay, these guys are serious. Like, obviously, and most sellers, I think, are reasonable about, like, if something's really bad, right?
Yeah.
Like the foundation's messed up, like people they're going to be reasonable about that. So that's an easy one. I think you mentioned the deposit. I always try to lead with a really strong deposit, because in Pennsylvania, you get that back. It's refundable. So why not, send a strong signal? I'm not going to let you breach the contract. So either way, that's not really a risk. Appraisals are a little bit more tricky. And I think it depends on, it obviously depends on the type of the property. I do think on the one end of the spectrum, going back to those different types of properties, like super turnkey, crazy high revenue, we see that in the Poconos where, like, if you see something that looks too good to be true, it's probably true. It just has an appraisal gap, right? But,
Right.
which on some level makes sense, right? Because if the property has all these things that are making it, generate a lot of cash flow as a short-term rental, to ask for it, and it's got furniture and a hot tub and everything else, to ask for it to appraise exactly in the residential realm, like you're asking for a little bit of your cake and eat it too. So, but on the other hand, so I think we do play with appraisal gaps there sometimes, at least, like for the amount of the furniture or something like that, which we always try to roll it into the loan, but at least you give the seller a little bit of comfort that, like, they've got a little bit of a gap. But honestly, more often than that, I'm thinking of the appraisal as an opportunity to renegotiate, because, if the seller thinks, like, when you give an offer for the seller, that's a unilateral opinion of what you think the property's worth, right? So he's going to be least, he's going to be not very open to hearing that you think his property's worth less. The inspection is a little bit, you have a little bit more leg to, room to stand on, but it's still, he says, oh, I don't think it's a big deal. And I will, so there's a little bit of interpretation. But when the bank says that appraisal comes in low, well then, I mean, that's a third party. That's actually probably your strongest negotiating leverage that you can possibly have with a seller. And most of the time, I think, people aren't doing big appraisal gaps. So, I actually, I actually use that as a way to kind of renegotiate things often. It's normally your best shot at kind of getting a lower price.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Like, don't plan on it, don't count on it, but it does give you that other opportunity to the numbers for you. So as we continue talking about like how to stand out, from other buyers in this competitive situation. So for you, like, how can you use relationships, whether that's with agents, lenders, maybe other sellers, how are relationships important, or why are they important to give buyers an edge?
Yeah, I think this is actually probably a huge one that I think if you're just buyers probably don't think about, because you don't, you're not like in the industry, and we know everybody, most people know each other, right? And we do a lot of business together, and so it's actually a really big deal. I think there's this, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's this one agent out here that if I ever on my listing I ever get an offer from her, I'm like, oh, please don't let me have to work with this, with this agent, because some agents are easy to deal with. They communicate well, right? They're reasonable, right? And I think your reputation kind of precedes you in a lot of ways. And so if you're working with a strong agent, like I would like to think that, listing agents like to work with me, right? Because they know I'm serious. I've got good clients, right? I'm not throwing out lowball offers left and right. And so having an agent that is strong, and also that they know I'm going to close the deal, because if something complicated happens or we hit a problem, I can probably figure out a way to solve it. And so all of those things actually, you don't ever see them like in the contract, but they play a really big role. And I think that's true. I think that's true across the board. I mean, with, not just the agent relationship, but then the lender. And so, yeah, what do you think? I mean, how do you use those relationships in terms of lenders or inspectors or other people?
Yeah, I think all the ones you touched on, I think a different one, and I'm sure you probably experienced the same. I think one of the things that most of us all do a good job at 𝗪𝗵, and 𝗪𝗵 as a team in general, is we kind of are known in our markets as being the short-term rental expert, right? And so that kind of gets spread around. And so other agents in my market know that I have short-term rental clients and investors that are looking. And so I often will get a text from another agent says, hey, I just signed on a new listing. I think it would be a good short-term rental. You're live for a couple of weeks, but if this is interesting to you, let me know, right? And so just having those relationships, and 𝗪𝗵 being the known experts in our markets, gives us that competitive advantage, because we're going to know about homes before a traditional person that's been in the market 15 years selling primary homes, right? And so we kind of get the heads up that some properties are coming on the market. Not everyone. I wish I knew everyone that was coming on the market, but yeah. So getting that heads up can give us that advantage, because sometimes we can get it off the market before it hits the market, right? So for sure. So we had a question came in through the chat. I want to run by you, Michael. So 𝗀𝗲 asks, is there anything like the best property for short-term rental? Every property stand the chance of becoming the best short-term rental with the right strategy in place. So can every property be a great short-term rental? Or is there a certain criteria that you look for in the Poconos?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you were saying. I think we know there's kind of a playbook, right? Like, we know what are the right ingredients that are necessary in a given market, right, for a particular customer avatar that's required to be successful. And so the answer is that yes, with enough money, right? Like anything can be a good short-term rental, but that's not, that's actually one of the litmus tests I kind of use, with my clients. I'm like, look, renovations are stressful. This property is just not worth it, right? It's just too much. It's too outdated. It's never going to produce enough cash flow. It's just not special enough that, so yeah, I think you're really looking, that's kind of the art of, and what's interesting is, like, you mentioned about, being a short-term rental agent versus, it's funny to me because a lot of residential agents still they don't see, you're just looking at the property, or we're looking at, okay, well, this has a backyard, this has a, this is what we can do with this. It has enough space for both a pool and a pickleball court, where, it sounds like Bradenton's that way, but Poconos is that way. I mean, if you have a small lot, like, you just can't fit a pickleball court.
Yeah.
And a residential agent might be looking at it and say, hey, this property looks really great. And you're like, yeah, but I can't get the revenue up. I can't add that value. So,
yeah.
So I think that's what is really, really key is figuring out, is seeing those, working with somebody who can see, that knows what are the ingredients that are needed and how to value each one of those ingredients, right? On top of also finding doing the diligence and finding a good piece of real estate and making sure that there's not a lot of deferred maintenance and all that.
Yep. Yeah. You touched on it. It's, the home can be changed. I'll say, and sometimes it takes more money than makes sense to change the home, but you can't ever add more acreage to the lot, right? And in my market, it's all about having a good home is to add the outdoor amenities. We're an outdoor, people come to Florida to be outside, enjoy the weather. And, if we can create that outdoor experience, that's great. Having a pool is kind of like checkbox just to get into the game, right? It's not the end of it. So it has to have the pool, but then, like, what other outdoor experiences can you create? And yeah, we can always update the home to make it more attractive with good design and some updates. So let's move on and talk about, how we structure offers, right? That can get accepted. We've touched on this a little bit throughout. There's one specific maybe strategy I want to ask you about, Michael, and get your feedback. And that's escalation clauses. So do escalation clauses really work? Or do they backfire on you? And maybe what is an escalation clause? Let's start there. Let's define it, and then tell me.
So escalation clause is, it's basically a clause that allows you to say that you'll beat the next best offer by a certain amount up to a maximum price. That's essentially what it is, right? So I think they work. I think they're a good tool, and I think they're for a specific situation, and it's for a situation where it's competitive. And you're like, well, how much do I need to offer? And I'm like, well, I normally have like a sense for kind of what the market clearing price is going to be, but we don't know for sure because there's other parties at the table and we have no idea to know exactly what they're going to do. And so an escalation clause is built for that purpose, that you can say, okay, well, you know what? I'm willing to pay up to, whatever. I'm willing to pay $25,000 over the asking price, up to that maximum. I just want to win and beat the next guy by $2,500. And so I think so in a competitive situation, I think they do work. I think you're supposed to, the listing agent is going to give you furnish a copy of the next best offer, right? So you're going to have proof that, they're not just like writing a number in the contract and saying, hey, it's the price.
Right.
But so I do think, and I think as long as I don't think 99% of agents would risk, their license to play around with that. Cause I think a lot of people are untrusting when they hear the concept of it, but I do think, I'm normally not so worried about that. I've used them on my own properties. And in fact, pretty much every property I bought had an escalation clause. But I think the one place where they don't work is when it's not competitive yet. Because like you don't just want to drop an escalation clause in and wait around, because then you're actually giving the seller an incentive to wait around and to hopefully get a better offer. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I typically will recommend to my clients we introduce them when we get that best and final call, where they just say, you know what, like we've got maybe 3 or 4 offers submitted. We just want our best and finals by noon tomorrow. Okay. So the seller is not engaging in kind of giving us, any feedback. They just want us to submit our best and final. That's typically when we'll introduce that escalation clause. Like, okay, run the numbers. This isn't like picking your target price of where you wanted to buy it at. This is saying like, you know what, like this is my maximum price. And we escalate up to that number, right? And if it went for 5,000 over that, you're like, that's fine. Numbers didn't work. I don't want it at that price. But the last thing you want, especially as an investor, is like, man, I would have gone 5,000 more for that if I'd known it was only 5,000 more than what we were offering, right? So that alleviates that, and also make sure you don't overpay. So you're right. I think it is a good tool to use in the right situations.
One last question for you on that, or kind of around that. I mean, in terms of like waiving contingencies, waiving inspections, all cash offers, waiving financing contingencies. They actually just changed that in Pennsylvania, where, before you could basically just say you waive the financing, but still get financing. Now there's like, you have to be explicit about that. But how do you go about, counseling people about if they want to do that, or when you should do that, or how you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, our job, right, is to look out for and protect our clients, right? And kind of, see the things that maybe they don't do, can't see because they're not doing this every day. So I always advise and give the information for them to make the decision, right? And let them know like, hey, if you want to waive your inspection contingency or the financing contingency, like here's what you are saying is like, if you say that we're going to waive the financing contingency, you're going to be responsible to purchase and close on that home no matter where your financing comes in, right? So if there's a gap, or if financing says, hey, we're not ready, we need to extend it, if the sellers aren't willing to extend, you have to be ready to close. You have to have the means to close. So if they can't, always looking to protect the buyers first. And so it really comes down to that risk tolerance that they're willing to take on. You're like, but sometimes if we're looking at a home that is newer, we see it's been remodeled, we'll do our due diligence. And if someone says like, hey, we're not going to give you any money for repairs, it's like, okay, well, maybe we're fine with that, but we're still going to do the inspection and walk away if there's that major issue that like, like found out that it's got cast iron plumbing underneath and they remodeled everything, but the cast iron underneath is falling apart. It's $40,000 to rip it up and replace it. Right? Okay, we're walking away from that deal because it doesn't make sense. Sometimes we just let them know and they come back because no one else is going to want to buy it at that. But yeah, most of the time it is making sure that buyers are protected, because you don't want to put yourself at risk just to get the winning deal, and open yourself up to risk of losing that escrow deposit or earnest money if it's not necessary. How about you? I think every state's a little different on the contingencies you talked about. We're typically not waiving many of those on our side, but do you have a different experience?
Yeah, it most of the time, I think what you said around, a lot of times people are like, hey, it's still in the residential realm. So people are like, do the inspection. We're just not going to give you anything for it. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because then you kind of have, you at least have some protection for something major. But yeah, I really did. I'm sad that they took away that financing contingency, because and I think with financing, as long as you have enough time to close, and the buyer would know that better than anybody else. You have to ask yourself, like, am I going to have a problem getting this mortgage? And then also your exposure is your earnest money deposit. But I feel like that one is one that we've waived a couple times, where we were really confident the home was going to appraise, and the buyer was really confident, that they're not going to have any issue with financing. So that one is a little bit more. With inspections, you almost have to ask yourself though, because like once a listing agent starts kind of fishing for inspections waived, I get like red flags, start to go up, and I'm like,
right.
Probably not. I mean, I think the one area where it makes sense would be if you're planning to like renovate the whole house. You know what I mean? Like it's a
Right.
forced appreciation situation, because then it's like, like obviously you're gonna repair everything. So that one I think does make a little sense within reason. You always have to kind of calculate your exposure.
Yep, I agree. So as we're getting to the end here, and we close out, if you had one piece of advice to give an investor that's frustrated, they've been losing deals, they can't get that deal under contract, what advice would you give them to help them, get that house under contract?
Well, I think one is like, I think you have to kind of pick an agent that you think is going to have a pulse on the market, and that you can trust, and actually trust them, right? And take some of their advice. Because, when I bought my first short-term rentals, I wasn't an agent, so I was using other agents. And I remember, if I go back to that, each time we would throw in an offer, right? It would always take us like 3 or 4 offers to get to the winning offer.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, can I get away with it? Can I get away with it? And then eventually each time you start like increasing your offer, which is kind of not a good way of doing it. Like if you want a property and it's a good deal, you want to win it. And you don't want to get to the point where you're just exhausted, right? And you're kind of willing to do anything to get a deal done. And so, and that's the value of, somebody who's really active in the market and knows exactly what it's going to take to win these deals. But you gotta take their advice in order to actually be successful. So that's
I think people are probably losing deals because of lack of speed. All right. Or lack of confidence. And that lack of confidence comes from just not being familiar, not doing it right. And I think that's where it's important I tell my clients, like, kind of like, let me be your confidence. Like, I'm doing this. Like, I take great pride in getting my clients into good cash flowing properties, because all it takes is 1 or 2, right? And then like that information is going to go across the market. We're going to lose our credibility, right? And so take great pride in getting them in winning deals. And so, I try to do my part of like presenting that confidence. And I also will tell them why I don't like a deal. Like, here's one, like maybe they send to me, I'm like, I don't like this, and here's why. And so that can help instill that confidence as well. But then also, like, like we have that inspection period. Like, I feel really good about this. I think you should offer. Let's get this under contract. And if I don't convince you in 10 days while we're doing the inspection, and like, now you got 10 days to grill me as much as you want and see if you can build your confidence up to the level that I have. And then, if it doesn't work out, let's cancel that, get our deposit back, and we move on and find that next deal. But kind of going through it builds that confidence level and gives you the speed. So I'd say rely on the confidence of picking a good agent, someone that knows this market that you can rely on, and really trust them to have that confidence that maybe you don't quite have, because maybe this is your first purchase in this market, or maybe your first short-term rental purchase.
Awesome. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. There's a reason the contingencies are there. So and I think you can, again, just to add to that, I mean, when you're on the buy side, seller has all the leverage up until you put it in contract. Then when you put it in contract, the leverage shifts. So, and as long as you have some contingencies, you still got some wiggle room, and you still got, those, some safety. So.
Okay. Well, Michael, it's been great chatting with you this morning. Hopefully that's given some tips to those buyers out there that finding themselves in some competitive situations and haven't been able to get something under contract. I know for myself, and I'm sure you're the same, if anyone out there has questions or they want to get connected, you can find us on Facebook, find us on the Savvy channels. And if we can't help you, we'll certainly get you connected with someone that can, or if it's in a different market than our markets, we'll connect you with our team that can get you to the market you're looking for. But Michael, again, appreciate your time this morning. Good chatting through it, and good luck to everyone out there. We got, if you're watching this now, we got about another month and a half to get you under contract before we run out of time in 2025. So don't wait till December. It's going to be too late. All right.
Thanks, Rich.